Hello, I'm Adrian Watkins. I'm the rector of North Hartismere in the county of Suffolk. Welcome again to Oakley Rectory. Now, I recently have enjoyed looking out on the field next to our home and seeing a calming view of a large flock of sheep. And I've been reminded by that Jesus took a very similar scene from everyday life in rural Palestine, added to it a shepherd, a sheepfold, a gate, and disturbingly too, thieves and bandits. And this is what he says about it. Truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way is a thief and bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they didn't understand what he was saying to them. So again Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Jesus is using this picture language to say, actually, it's a matter of life and death that we listen to the voice of truth and love represented by the Good Shepherd rather than deceptive and destructive voices represented by thieves. The theme of life and death, has of course captured our attention in recent days. For example, here in the UK, we held a minute's silence last Tuesday to respect all the medical and healthcare workers who have died from the coronavirus while serving others. And then there's been the grim daily tally of numbers of those who've died each day or since the start of the pandemic. As an antidote to all this depressing death news, we often try to latch on to good news life stories, such as that of Captain Tom, who in the days before his 100th birthday has gallantly raised over £32 million for the NHS, or the story of a baby boy born to the Prime Minister and his partner. And there are many other good news stories of communities as well, coming together as people help one another in practical ways. I also have a personal good news story as well. My 96-year-old mother was recently in hospital. She tested positive for the coronavirus. I admit that my first thought then was that this is a death sentence. But 5 days later, she had recovered and was sent home. Such good news stories are actually signs of the God of life who sustains every living being day by day with the breath of life. And Jesus talks about shepherd and sheep to remind us that the voice of God is a life-giving and good news kind of voice. He says, the sheep hear his voice, they know his voice. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. The life-giving God still speaks through Jesus today to invite us to new life, new beginnings, even in the face of chaos, uncertainty, and death. But Jesus also warns that there are the alternative voices of strangers and thieves that try to divert the sheep onto dangerous and destructive paths. But the sheep are kept safe from them, says Jesus, because they've learned to recognize the voice of their own good shepherd. I think today we too need to distinguish the false from the true voice and cultivate tuning in to the voice of Jesus, the Good Shepherd. But that raises a question, doesn't it? What voices do we listen to most of the time? Maybe you listen most to your husband or your wife, your partner, a family member or a friend. I would suggest that the voice that we listen to most is not so much as that of a single individual, but voices that come to us from the surrounding culture and society. And increasingly, the dominant means by which different voices are mediated to us today, unlike in earlier generations, are now through a bewildering range of screens and electronic devices and gadgetry that become the conduits for all kinds of words, sounds, and images. We turn to them, don't we, for entertainment, information, social and work networking, and of course shopping, travel plans. I think some people can't even go along the street, drive in the car or have a bath without pumping noise of one form or another into their brains. And all these voices and noises actually are very often undergirded by values, behaviour and beliefs and understandings that diverge from the voice of the Good Shepherd. Though, of course, they may also sometimes reflect his voice. But Jesus' picture of sheep and shepherds makes it clear that the quality of our lives are inextricably intertwined with the voices that we choose to listen to. And that too, there's always one voice quietly waiting on the sidelines for us to shut out all the other distracting noises so that we might hear and listen. And it's the voice, of course, of Jesus. Jesus himself says this to Pilate in the 18th chapter of St. John's Gospel. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. And in the passage we read, my sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. Most of ancient Israel, Palestine, was rough, stony pasture land, so that the wandering shepherd then was a common sight with his flock. And sheep then were kept more for wool than for meat, and the shepherd would herd, care, and protect them over several years. As the shepherds led them through a gate into an enclosure at night for their protection, and led them out again in the morning, they would know each one individually, calling them by name, often such as Blackear or Whitey. And the sheep were not frightened to go in or come out because they had become familiar with the shepherd's voice. In this pastoral picture that Jesus gives us, he also mixes his metaphors, portraying himself not only as the good shepherd who leads the sheep into lush pasture lands so that they can feed there, in other words, into life in all its abundance, but he's also the gate, the entry point into a place of safety and salvation. Hearing the voice of Jesus delivering us, saving us, and leading us into fullness of life happens in practice when we reflect on the scriptures, God's words, and still our hearts before him. And we may also, of course, hear it through other people who may bring a word of wisdom or hope to us, or perhaps God speaks to us through a situation or event happening in our life. But in whatever way it's mediated, we ultimately hear the voice of Jesus when we are in an attitude of prayer. And this is also about a movement not just from wordy talkative prayer, but to a listening kind of prayer. Movement from chatter to stillness. Now, most people today live in a very hyper-connected world, connected to music, noise, entertainment, information, networks, but at the same time weirdly disconnected from themselves and indeed from God. I wonder too if this continual need to fill our heads with visible and audible inputs from gadgets is actually a strategy of avoidance, preventing us from being still, thinking through deeper questions of life and death, from examining our heart and life, thinking about our relationship to God and to others. And yet, such countercultural, even subversive silence and stillness is a prerequisite for creating that space that allows us to sense palpably the presence of God with us. Silence, in fact, brims with the presence of God, who's waiting for us to hear his voice. And it's the great discovery that leads us to fullness of life. Remember, for Elijah, the voice of the Lord didn't come in the earthquake, wind, or fire, but as a still, small voice. But actually, it doesn't just stop at hearing this voice of the Good Shepherd. In Jesus' imagery, the sheep then also follow him. He leads them out of the sheepfold, out of their comfort zone, out of a place of safety and security, and into the risky and potentially dangerous fields of the open countryside. So the point he's making is very clear. Fullness of life isn't just learning to recognize and listen to the voice of Jesus. It must also lead to obedient following, to movement and action. And this fullness of life isn't just an endless succession of experiential or emotional highs. It's rather about life that is whole and complete, having value and purpose, a life that brings inner joy and peace. Now, we can also ask if it's about following Jesus, this life, where actually does Jesus go to? Well, he goes to the cross, to suffering, and to death. Jesus says, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Jesus freely gives his life for others, and as he does so, then reveals the height, length, depth, and breadth of the love of God, a God who is love. And Jesus calls us to follow him on this same path of love, a road that will involve self-giving and self-denial as we serve others. But if we are on that road, it will always lead beyond the pain of the cross to resurrection, to new beginnings, to new and abundant life. Again, as Jesus said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So as I close, these are the questions that come to mind to us today. First, are we actually attuned really to hear the voice of Christ coming to us, calling us personally? Are we ever still enough to discern his voice amidst the clamouring voices and cacophony of noise all around? Secondly, do we recognise that other alluring voices are underneath just thieves and bandits plotting to rob us of fullness of life? And thirdly and finally, are we ready for an adventure, a journey? Jesus speaks in order to take us from one place to another. It might be a literal journey or it might be a metaphorical one. Either way, it's a path of obedience that leads us in some way being extended beyond ourselves outwards towards others. And it is in giving ourselves to him and to others that we find that Jesus then nourishes us with his life-giving presence and power, his life-enhancing peace and joy. And above all, a life that's lived in communion with him and with the other sheep of the sheepfold. And ultimately, too, with those sheep who are currently lost and astray, whom he is seeking to find and to bring home. And joining with Jesus in that mission, too, is at the heart of the Christian life. Finally, some words from Psalm 95. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. A prayer of St. Richard of Chichester as we close. Thanks be to you, my Lord Jesus Christ, for all the benefits you have given me, for all the pains and insults you have borne for me. O most merciful Redeemer, friend and brother, may I know you more clearly, love you more dearly, follow you more nearly. Amen. Thank you for joining me. May the presence of God, the Good Shepherd, Jesus the Good Shepherd, go with you this day and every day.